May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Last Sunday of the Epiphany season, Sunday before Ash Wednesday, when we begin our 40 days, not counting Sundays, of Lent. And we always read this story on this last Sunday of Epiphany. In one of its forms, we read this story of what Jesus did before he set his face to Jerusalem. How he went up on that mountain, took some disciples with him, and checked in with God to see if the direction he thought he was going really was the right going. There he was on that mountain, and there God was for him. And I don't know why, but it reminds me of a joke that I got an email the other day. I actually get it in email occasionally throughout the years, and it goes like this. It tells of a grandmother who came to church much like this on a Sunday morning, brought her little grandson with her. And as is the case for us, the boy went out to Sunday school during the first part of the service and then came back and joined her in the service. So when she got home with her grandson, she asked him, "What did you study this morning in Sunday school?" Well, you know the answer that all kids give when they're asked a question like that. He said, "Nothing." She said, "Are you sure?" "Yep." "You didn't study anything?" "Nope, nothing." She was not willing to leave it at that. So she pushed a little harder. And she said, "Didn't you study Jesus?" And the little boy, with a very outdone expression on his face, looked at her and said, "No, he wasn't even there." And that's what today is about. Do you realize he's here? Do you realize the presence of the Lord is here? Or do you think you're just in it all by yourself? All of our scriptures remind us this morning that contrary to what may appear to be the case, Jesus really is here. The glory of God really is here. The power of the presence of God really is here. Because that's what glory means. Glory is simply the word we use for what happens when the presence and the power of God is made obvious to us, whether it's through light or sound or whatever, that the glory of God is an obvious experience of the presence of God in our lives. And in the Old Testament lesson, we experience how that glory of God was experienced by Moses. How he went up on that mountain for the second time. And though we didn't hear about it today, if we had read just a few verses before, we would have known that when he went up on that mountain for the second time to receive the replacement tablets after the first had been broken in anger, he asked to see the glory of God. He asked to see the presence. Something that nobody dared ask, because everybody knew that the glory of God in its fullness would be too much for anybody to even bear. Too bright. Too much. But he asked. And so God hid him, the story goes, in a crevice. And he was able to see the back of God. And that in itself was such an incredible experience that the light of that presence, the story goes, shined in Moses' face. So that when he came back down the mountain and his skin was shining like this, he scared the bejesus out of everybody that was down there and had to put a veil over his face to cover up some of the brightness, and only took off the veil when he was speaking for God so that they knew that it wasn't just Moses thinking up all of these things on his own, but that the power of the presence of God was speaking through him. In some way, those people had an experience of the presence of God through the face of Moses. And it was that same powerful presence of God that years later on another mountain enveloped Jesus when before he began to do the hardest thing in his life that he would ever have to do, he took a few of his closest friends and went up on a mountain to pray. He had already told them just before, that he was setting his face to Jerusalem, and that he knew full well what that meant. Because they had warned him. They didn't want him to do that. They didn't want him to go. But he had told them that he believed this was what God wanted him to do. And before they do that, he takes them and he goes up on the mountain to ask God, is this true? Is this what I am to do? And we are told that he gets an unbelievable sign of affirmation, that he is enveloped with this same type of glory that caused Moses' face to shine. This same face-to-face experience with the power of the presence of God, that in his case turned his whole body into a shining body of dazzling white. And that not only that, but that Moses, who of course had died generations before, that Moses appeared in that glory with him, the supreme lawgiver. And Elijah, who had been taken up many generations before, the one who is considered the supreme prophet, the one who would be the forebearer, the one that came before the Messiah came, he was there too, enwrapped in that same glory, that same presence of God, so that Jesus knew that what he thought he was going to have to do was exactly what he was going to have to do. And not only that, but that the people that he had brought with him, these closest friends, who as close as they were to him never seemed to quite get things right, who were weighed down with sleep, somehow knew that that time they shouldn't fall asleep. And they stayed awake. And because they were awake, they caught a glimpse of this glory too. Peter and James and John had their first-hand experience of the presence of God by seeing the glory of God in the face of Jesus. Wonderful, wonderful stories. But then they come down from the mountain. They come down to a crowd that's waiting for them. They come down to the disciples that he left when they went on the mountain. The ones that he had told, I'm going up on the mountain to pray with Peter, James, and John. I want you guys to stay down here and take care of the things I would normally take care of. This is what he's told them before he goes up. He says, I'm going to give you this power that we've seen at work in me. Because they had all seen some power at work in him, maybe not shining lights, but they had seen the power of his healing and his teaching and his power to reach out to people that were on the outskirts and bring them in. They had seen that. And he says, I give that to you. Trust it. You have it. And he went up on the mountain to pray, trusting that they would do this. And he comes back down to the mountain, and he finds out that they had been miserable failures at it. This poor man who all he wanted was for his son to be healed, they've tried and they couldn't do it. And Jesus, in something that we tend to think is very uncharacteristic, is mad as blazes at them. Those words that he uses, you perverse generation, those aren't words we like to hear coming from our Jesus, the one who hangs so sweetly on Sunday school walls. He's mad. He's angry. And you don't know exactly, is he angry at the disciples because they didn't have enough trust in the power that he had given them to do what they could do? Is he angry at maybe the man, the father, because maybe he didn't have enough trust that they could do it and only wanted Jesus, wouldn't settle for a substitute? Who is he mad at? I don't know. Maybe it was some of all of it. But he was angry because he knew that our lives would someday depend on our understanding that the power of Jesus and the power of the presence of God is with us whether we see it or not.